Welcome to the Leaders of Transformation podcast, the number one show for business leaders and entrepreneurs passionate about uplifting others and making a greater impact in the world. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and you can join me live every Tuesday as I interview difference makers and world changers on leadership, business, societal transformation, mindset, and so much more. This show is actually brought to you by my coaching and training company, Leaders of Transformation. And if you are a leader or an aspiring leader who is ready to break through to the next level of success, and you want to create a greater impact in your business, in your community, in the world at large, you've got issues that you need to solve, perhaps complex issues, and you need some guidance in that direction, go to leadersoftransformation.com/coaching. And you can book a free consultation with me. All right, so let's get to our guest today. Jenn Donahue is a military veteran who commanded an 800-person battalion in Afghanistan. She is a PhD civil engineer completing large-scale geotechnical projects. She is an entrepreneur, a mentor, a university lecturer, and so much more. And I love what her website says. It says the only thing that she hasn't done is quit, which is my kind of woman. So I am excited to have her here. Our topic is bridging the leadership gap for young professionals. And let me bring her on here. Jenn, welcome to Leaders of Transformation. We're excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Me too. You know what? This issue of a leadership gap, actually, I remember a gentleman who was an executive recruiter many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, said to me, you know what? I foresee a leadership gap, because he was the one recruiting leaders for organizations, nonprofits, and so forth. And he said there is this quickly growing gap in expertise. And so I was really excited to hear that this is something that you work with. And so tell us a little bit more. I gave a very quick snapshot, and there's a lot in there. Okay, so military veteran, doing some awesome things there. You're a civil engineer. You're all these other things. Give us a little bit more of the backstory of where it started, and maybe even starting with your military experience. What led you to get into the military?
So to be honest, I actually started out being an engineer. I went to Texas A&M University and I became an ocean engineer. And I was looking at all of my friends, and they were going down to Houston and getting jobs with the oil and gas industry. And I was like, I just had so much angst, and I felt like, you know what, I need to go do something. I need to go out and I need to see the world and experience it. So I looked at the different uniform services and found that the Navy was the best fit for me, because they had a civil engineer corps. And what they do is they go out all over the world and they do expeditionary construction. So lightweight construction, roads, water wells, things like that, and all these far off places. And I thought, you know what, that's for me. And so I signed up, and it was probably the best decision of my entire life.
And I'm on mute. Awesome. Hey, listen, I'm not sure if it's on your end or mine, but I noticed that there's static. Do you happen to hear static when I'm speaking?
I don't hear any static.
Okay, so I'm not sure if it keeps going. We may just have to pause and figure out what's causing that. But because it wasn't doing it when we were initially doing the test audio test, so I'm not sure if that's just me or if that's you. So, but anyway, well, so you became an engineer first, then you wanted to see the world, then you got into the military. What was your experience like being in, and then we're going to come back to the engineering part. And of course, that's, I think, a lot more of what you do now again anyway. But this idea of you, because I think that this really struck me when I read your bio. And, I think about being a military officer, a female naval officer, and the environment, for learning leadership skills and all of that, and being a woman around largely men, and then actually even not just being in that environment, but then leading 800 soldiers. So can you talk about that experience and maybe one of your biggest obstacles that you faced?
Absolutely. So there's very few women in engineering to begin with. I was basically about one of like 25% whenever I was going through Texas A&M. And so there's even fewer women in engineering that joined the military. And so, you're weeding out. And so now I was in an area where I was really only about 9% women. And so you're totally surrounded by a boys' club. And when I joined the military, this was in the mid 90s, and that's when they were first starting to let females into the combat battalions. So when I joined the combat battalion, there was only 2 other female officers that had ever been in there. So it had been a boys' club since like 1942. And now all of a sudden they're starting to let females in. And it was really kind of a shock to the system because they didn't quite know what to do with us. They were used to going out in the field and setting up a tent. Well, now you have to set up a separate tent for the women. And so it was one of those things that we started to go through, and really we were trying to forge our own path because no one had really gone before us. And so I joined, and I was a very junior, female officer. And my first job was to take 18 people to a small island in a net. So I'm the only officer, I'm the only female in charge of these 18 guys, and we are drilling and blasting a road across the island. And let me tell you, that was very eye-opening because I didn't understand really how to lead. So I had all these things against me, and luckily I had a really good mentor. In the military, you usually have a senior enlisted member that they pair young officers with. And he was absolutely great at helping me become a better leader. He'd kind of whisper in my ear, like, hey, you need to think about this. You need to think about that. So I was very fortunate that I had someone to help guide me. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would be the leader that I am today. And so as I was going through the military, and I've actually been in for 26 years now, which is absolutely crazy to think about, but I had to learn to be my own leader. A lot of times I would look up to the men that were of higher rank, and they were all yellers. And, I thought, oh, well, that's what I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to yell at people in order to get them to do what I want. And that was like a complete failure. So I had to develop my own method of leading as I was going through this entire, 26-year career. And I think I only really got good at it in about the last 15, to be honest.
Wow. Well, so I'm curious, some of the things, those nuggets that you learned, what were some of when you said, don't do this, or maybe you want to do that, what were some of the things that stood out? Because I find oftentimes it's those things that maybe someone said that one time that stick in your mind and change the trajectory and the way that you do things. I know that there are statements that people have made to me over the years that are like that. And so I'm just curious if anything stands out for you.
There was one officer that I had, and he was fantastic, and he was so charismatic. And I learned a lot from him because I realized that he was all about the team and understanding each person in the team and the strengths and the weaknesses that they had. And he was able to bring out the best in people. And that was the first time in my career that I'd run across an officer like him. Like I said, everybody else previous to that had basically been yelling and demeaning and, basically put under pressure because you felt like you had to perform, so that you didn't get yelled at. Whereas he was able to turn it, and people wanted to perform really well because they wanted to make him proud of them. And it's like, wow, that's a completely different transformation from what I had previously seen. And so I realized that, that's more my personality. I want to get to know people. I want to listen to them. I want to find out what their strengths are, what their goals and aspirations can be, and help them. And all of a sudden now I'm starting to get more of a following, or, people want to be on my team and they want to go out, and do these different projects with me because I'm trying to help them at the same time. And that was probably one of the biggest transformations that I had as a young officer, and understanding like the type of leader that I really want to be.
Yeah, and I think that's where mentorship is so important, to learn those things that are from firsthand experience. You focus on young professionals and teaching them. So what is one of the first things that you teach, like the first kind of, okay, you're entering this world of leadership. Here's what you got to know.
Number one, you have to know yourself. It always starts with you. Like I said, whenever I was young, and they did teach us leadership whenever I was at going through Officer Candidate School. I had drill instructors yelling at me and spitting in my face and trying to teach me leadership that way. And so I was going through this path and thinking, okay, well, this is the kind of leader that I need to be. And it wasn't until I really looked at myself and who I was that I was able to try to transform myself into a better leader. So the first thing that I tell every single new leader, new professional, new scientist, new engineer, new entrepreneur that I work with is you have to know yourself. And one of the best ways to do this, and I hate to say it, is really going through some of those personality tests. And I was so skeptical when I first started doing these. I was thinking, man, there is no way this test that I'm writing down my answers is ever going to tell me who I am and who I am as a leader. And when I got the results back, it was like, oh, shoot, that's me. And it's like, they're very, very accurate as telling you what your strengths are. But I like that they also highlight what your weaknesses are either and how you're being perceived as a leader. And so that you can start to focus on those so that you can shore up yourself before you go out and start to lead a team. So I would always say, that's the Delphic maxim from 1400 BC that was written on the Temple of Apollo, know thyself. So start there. That's the number one thing that I always tell everyone.
Yeah. And I think self-awareness is something that we think we have. It's like, I know that I know. I mean, I know who I am. I know there has been leaders that I've worked with, business leaders, and you ask them and you say, like, how are you as a leader? Which is a stupid question, of course, but because they're going to be biased. We talk about bias, like that's the ultimate bias, right? Is like, how good are you as a leader? Or how good are you? Oh, I'm great. People like me, and then of course it's like, can we verify that? Can I talk to a few people and actually find out the experience of being under your leadership? And you get a whole different perspective.
Right.
And then you have these 360 reviews that you can do, and they're great. However, sometimes people are afraid. I know they're anonymous, but if you got a small team, it's like, which one of you said that I wasn't a good listener, So it's a little tricky. But when you have an assessment tool that says, these are based on your personality, based on your answers,
Mm-hmm.
these are the areas of your strength. And I love the balance, right? Here are your strengths, and here are the areas that you may need to watch out for. And then you can kind of determine and say, ooh, is that something that I really need to watch out for? But I love that. Know thyself. How can you possibly lead anyone else unless you understand yourself first and understand how you actually, it's like Tony Robbins talks about, communication is the response you get. So now you talk about, obviously talking to leaders, the young professionals are getting into this space. We talk about there's a leadership gap. I started off talking about that.
Right.
What do we need to do? Obviously they can hire you and you can come in and work with their young professional leaders that are up and coming. From a systemic perspective, what do we need to do to really create true lasting change? I almost wonder if, in Europe and different parts of the world, and in Israel and different parts of the world, I know my dad, he had to go to the military, and it was like 2 years where I had to serve, and it developed so much discipline and so many things that he got out of that. I almost feel like it would be really helpful for young people to go through that, as a preparation time, for the rest of their life. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
That's a very good comment. And what I found also in some of the other countries where I've worked with others that have gone through that, I have friends in Greece who also have the 1 to 2 year conscript that they have to go to, in Korea as well. And I have found that they're very, very mature, for their age compared to some of their colleagues, since they've gone through that discipline, that attention to detail, that, they're giving some leadership abilities. And I find that they're actually a little bit more mature than others who have not. So it's a very good idea. I'm not sure how we would actually implement it, but there are some things that we can do. Maybe it's not sending people to military school, but I would say that we have to start looking at leadership at the very beginning. One of the things I've been researching is that most of the time when we have all these new engineers and new professionals, new scientists and new financial planners come in, we want to make sure that they are the most technically sound as possible. And we put all of our effort and everything that we have into making sure that they are technically proficient. One of the things we're not doing is we're not giving them any leadership guidance whatsoever. We're basically just throwing papers on their desk and saying, do this. Maybe if we start to look at more of a systemic way that we can bring them onto the leadership side, we'll start to bridge that gap. But it really takes a lot of effort and a lot of momentum to start at that beginning. I think by the time you get to be a middle manager or an executive, you've developed all these bad habits and the die is already cast, and it's hard to change your leadership style all the way at that point in your career, as opposed to starting out at the very beginning and really concentrating on trying to make better leaders at that point.
Yeah, I agree. I think the numbers, somebody told me, there was a guest that I had on, Tiana Sanchez, a number of years ago, and I forget the exact statistics about how much time you actually get training time for like leadership development versus how many hours you end up having to be in the field to develop that. And it was like minuscule. They basically just are like, here you go, learn it a lot, read some books. There's some books out there that you can read, and maybe there's a conference where you can go and listen to some speakers talking about what they did as a leader and their, a CEO or whatever. And that's great. But recently I had Tom Kolditz from the Doer Institute on.
Yes.
Yeah. He is awesome. And so you, obviously, him. So the passion that you both have is very similar in terms of the, helping the young professionals coming out of school. Of course, they're still in school because it's through the Rice University that, or it's at least on that campus, and then they're extending it out to teach these young people leadership skills and give them access to mentorship right out of the gate. And I asked him, I said, there's a lot of C-suite leaders, middle managers existing in business that could really use what you have to offer. And this was offline. I think we were talking about this. And I said, so why not also focus on there? Or, have you considered that? And he said, it's really a lot easier to teach young people out of the gate how to be good leaders than to try to convince a 55-year-old CEO who actually thinks he's a good leader, or she, how to actually change. And so he said, so we are creating a whole new generation of leaders, up and coming leaders. And that's their passion, and I saw that with you is that you have this passion for leaders. And so we could literally, and I said this years ago, we could change the world in one generation. Indeed, we already have, right? The world has changed in one generation. And so what we got to do is we got to change it, maybe back in some ways and forward in other ways, but do it with intentionality. So when you work with leaders, when you start off with, let's say somebody comes to you and starting to work with you, and we talk about some of these initial skills. So know thyself. What are some of the things? So you do the assessment. Okay, here's your strengths. Here's your weaknesses. How do they, from a practical standpoint, how do they start implementing those in their day-to-day behavior?
That's actually a pretty easy one and hard at the same time. So if you know what your real strengths are and you know how to convey those and how you are perceived by others, you can start to change your behavior so that you're more willing to take on that vulnerability to be a better leader. And what I mean by that is a quick story. For whenever I had a 360 assessment, turns out that I don't delegate very well. And that was called out in the 360 assessment by some of my direct reports. And I was like, oh, shoot, that's that's not good. They're like, I don't think she trusts us. She doesn't, allow us to do the work. She just keeps it all herself. And that was a real wake up call for me. And I didn't realize that I was doing it until I thought about it. And I was like, oh yeah, I absolutely do that. And so then I have to do my best to try to reverse that tendency. And it's something that you have to do on a day-to-day basis, because you really want to have the trust of your team. And once you understand how you're being perceived, you can start to work on that. And then you have to project out to start to convey that trust. And we always say that trust is a two-way street, but as a leader, you have to be to the on-ramp first, and you have to start to establish that trust in order for your team to trust you. And I have several different ways that you can start to work on that trust to start to build a better and cohesive team and really start to utilize the strengths that you have with that team. So that's what I typically go through and try to work with people on.
And what about, because I'll bet some of these young leaders have more mature people that are going to be reporting to them because they're the up and coming, going through the ranks and passing people, if you will. Right. How do you help them in the area of confidence to be able to build that trust that you talked about and be an effective leader and really have the confidence to step into that? Because it can be really scary. You've got somebody who's your father's age, right, that you're now giving direction to.
I would say you have to start with listening. Okay. And the reason why I say this is that, I would almost say have a lunch and learn with like each member of your team and understand where they are, what they do. And there's a little bit of vulnerability that goes with this, because you're basically saying, I don't know everything. But if you were able to show maybe someone who is your father's age, hey, I'd like to sit down. I'd like to understand what you do. Hey, how can we make the process better? That shows that you're, one, listening to them and care enough about like where you are as their leader in order to help them do what they need to do and maybe be better at what they're doing. But it also shows that, I'm confident enough that I can be vulnerable with you and still be your leader. And I think that's part of it. I hate to say it, but vulnerability is a great strength, and that helps you build your confidence, because you're showing us this like, hey, I'm confident in myself. I can go and I can ask these questions so that I can be better myself, and then I can make my team better as well.
So I think listening, oftentimes we listen because what we're doing is we're waiting for the next thing. And as a host, I have to watch out for that, right? That I'm not just waiting for the next thing and preparing the next thing that I'm going to say. And how often do we do that? Not even realizing that we're doing, we're saying, I'm listening to you. I heard what you said. And we're just ready with the next thing that we're going to say. Yes.
Can you give me 1 second? Yeah. Sorry. Someone's like at the door. So hold on 1 second. Like, sure. It's like ringing and like I'm trying to mute. So hold on 1 second.
It's okay. So while we're waiting for Jenn to come back, this is a great opportunity that if you are watching and you have a question for her, for Jenn Donahue, she's back. I was just saying how if anyone has a question, to post it in the chat. We've got people listening from. We've got Facebook, YouTube, and various channels that are dialing into this. And so, you can put that in the chat, and it's a great opportunity to ask questions if you're a young leader and you want to figure out how to learn how to be a better leader from someone who certainly knows how to do that. So, Jenn, coming back to what we were talking about, listening, absolutely. I think listening is one of those, it's like there's passive listening and then there's active listening. Actually, you know what? Maybe that's a great topic just for the moment, just to even talk about what is the difference between passive and active listening.
Great question. So the way that I think of passive listening is that I basically ask the question and then just sort of let everything come to me without like trying to think of like the next question. And as somebody who's an introvert, I like to take it all in and think about it before I have to jump back in. And I think of active listening as more of I'm asking a question, but I'm already thinking of like the next thing I want to ask you at the same time. And I know that different people have different definitions of what that is, but that's how I think of it. And like I said, I'm an introvert. I like to think about my questions, first, fully listen to them, let them kind of wash over me, and just let people keep talking. so that I'm getting through all of that and then stop, think about it, and then keep going. So that's just my definition. I know that there might be others out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking a couple minutes ago about how some people are just waiting to hear when you're finished so that they can jump in there. And then there is the just waiting because you're not really paying attention and you're half in, half out. Cause if you've ever been in one of those networking events and you're talking to somebody and they're also watching who else is in the room because they want to go and have that conversation over there. And it's really annoying when people do that. And it's being very intentional about not doing it, ourselves as well. One of the things that I find is really, it's more difficult when I'm doing it, just to be straight up. It is harder to do it when you're on a live stream and you're paying attention to all these things like I'm doing here. And I know that as I do this, I'm going to get better at doing it. It's really staying so present that you hear what people are saying. And also, I think it's also what people are not saying.
Right.
It's the nuances of it that when you're listening, and even as a leader, to be able to hear, what's going on and sense, because there's so much more to it than just what they're saying. It's their body language. It's the tone that they're using. It's kind of even just that intuition that you feel like, is everything okay? Are you, everything okay? You got, do you need to talk about something, or is there something that's because maybe they're not doing what they needed to be doing? Maybe it's because of something else that's going on that's not. And so this is why even confidence coming back to confidence, this idea of having confidence, because it's mindset. Our mindset drives our behaviors, which drive our results and determine our results and all of that. So this is good. So I'd love to talk, because leadership, and I think I'd be remiss not to talk about it, is leadership is so important, and especially right now. Mm-hmm. And as we kind of wrap up this segment, I would like for you to talk about maybe some of the, when we talk about gaps, right? Gaps from age and experience, mm-hmm. but I find that there's also gaps in integrity in leadership today. So how, obviously, self-awareness, listening, building trust, what are some of the things, the qualities of a leader that are really essential to be able to protect leaders from themselves, from going off that path? It's like the soldier who, the officer who starts off and then after a while he gets into that position, or she, and then they think they're all that and more. And, then they start like you said, spitting in people's faces and thinking that's the way to do it. Right. And that happens in business. That happens in business all the time, where people have this attitude like, you've got to listen to me, or I know what I'm doing. And they're above the law, or they're above feedback and reproach. And so, just what are some of those qualities that are important to protect yourself from falling down that path?
I think you have to stay absolutely grounded as a leader. The thing that you always have to remember is that when you're a leader, it's not about you anymore. And that's one thing I had to always tell my officers and the other leaders in my industry, is that when you're a leader, it's not about you. It's always about your team. And you have to keep going back to that mantra. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's about my team. And so that's one of the things that I always try to help people with. And if you're in an organization that's large enough, maybe set up some type of systematic testing of your leadership so that you have that feedback. And what I mean by that is, I know in the military we have the 360 assessments. And so since we're a large enough organization, you can get enough anonymous people to, to call in and basically say, hey, this person is this way or that. But maybe in a business as well, if you have somebody, that looks like they're starting to go off and say, hey, I'm all that, and you can't tell me how to be. I got to the position because I am who I am, and I can't be perfected. I'm the leader. I think that's when you really have to have those hard discussions with them and say, this is where you're failing. And if you can change this, we will be more successful. And those are really hard conversations to have. But if the person is really wanting to be a good leader, even though they might be misguided, they should be able to take some feedback. And if they're not going to take good feedback, well, that's a whole nother issue that probably needs to be brought up probably at a higher level. But I think it's just so important to remember that mantra is that it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about your team.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's probably a whole other podcast to talk about what do you do when you have a leader, a rogue leader who has gone off in that direction, and how do you reel them in, or when is it time to replace them? And the sad thing about it is there's so many leaders out there. And I guess this is why for me, leadership is so I'm so passionate about it, is because I realize that all success rises and falls on leadership. It's self-leadership. It's leading teams. It's leading a vision and casting a vision and moving forward, having a mission and going and making that happen. But leadership, it's such an essential, you can't create success without it. And right. And with where we are at in this world, we need that. We need better leaders. And unfortunately, I have seen many times where there are amazing leaders, strengths like galore, but there's this blind spot that hinders their success. And there's nothing worse than seeing an amazing, talented, extraordinary leader fall and not see and catch themselves in time. It's sad. And so, not to end on a bad, sad note, but to realize, and I say that this is really, really, that's why what you do is really important. That's why all the leadership consultants out there that I've had on this show, and others, that there's so many that I haven't even been able to, of course, interview half of them. But that's why this is so important that you do this work, so that we can protect them. And as you're doing it with young professionals, protecting them from actually ever getting to that point, so they stay in check and they can continue to thrive and lead their people well and be good mentors for the next generation as well. So thank you. I appreciate you, Jenn, being here. And I know you're a busy lady. You've got a ton of things going on, and we didn't even get to half of the projects you were working on, just really focusing on this area of leadership. But I'm going to encourage our listeners and viewers, if you are a young professional between the ages of 25 and 31, and you are looking for some quality mentorship and learning how to be a better leader in your organization, or maybe you're an aspiring leader that wants to move up into a leadership position, I would recommend that you go to jendonahue.com. We'll make sure that's all in the show notes on the leadersoftransformation.com website. But connect with Jenn. She's got great information also on her website as to what she does, how she does it, and some valuable resources. And of course, you can find her on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and all those other places as well. And also, before I forget, shout out to Smith Publicity. I always like to acknowledge the booking agencies and referral partners that I have that send me amazing guests. So as we wrap up, I also want to do a shout out for them, Smith Publicity. If you're looking for a company to get you on podcasts, they are one of many, but they do an excellent job and have always given us top-notch guests. And so Jenn, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you. And as I'm learning this whole live stream thing, it's kind of fun. But thank you for even just working with me through this process as well. We appreciate you being here. And thank you to our listeners. Yes.
No, I was just going to say, thank you so much for having me. This has been a great, great conversation. I think something that really needs to be had. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I'm sure there's so much more to talk about with you. That's why I'm encouraging everyone just go to your website and follow you there. You have some great, valuable information to share, and lots of other podcasts also that you've been on, so people continue to learn from you there as well. And thank you to our listeners for being here, because without you, the show wouldn't exist. And so we just appreciate you being here. And I believe that leaders of transformation take action. So with what we shared, it may not be earth shattering. You're like, yeah, trust, listening, self-awareness. I know all of that, which, by the way, are the three most dangerous words when it comes to learning and growth are I know that, because that will hinder your lens, the paradigm in which you see the world will be through I already know it. And if you already know it, then you won't be able to see those finer distinctions. And so even though these seem like topics that are talked about a lot, obviously with the state of leadership right now, we can all stand to get better. And so I would encourage you to take action on what Jenn has shared today, and really challenge yourself as a leader to say, how good am I as a leader? Ask a few people around you, where can I improve? What do you see that I don't see? The blind spot is called a blind spot for a reason, because we don't see it. That's why we want to have good people around us, coaches, mentors, good friends and colleagues who will be honest and tell us what's behind us that we can't see. So I encourage you, take action. It will help you to become a better leader. As you become a better leader, you'll be able to make a greater impact in the world, not only in your own life, of course, but in the world around you. And so we highly encourage you that. We look forward to hearing your stories and how this has impacted you. And stay tuned, because next week we have another great guest who is going to be on the show here, and we're going to talk about health and wellness. And he was a guest that was rescheduled, and now he's going to be talking about health and wellness. And so I encourage you to join us next Tuesday for another amazing conversation with a leader of transformation. Until then, have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.